Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.
This is True Crime Cast. Jamie and John here to get your April going.
Yeah, man. How you doing?
Doing all right. This is our first full episode of April. I would like to start out with an apology that John posted on social media that I was leaving the show as an April Fool's prank. Yeah, I didn't expect anybody to notice or care, but we got a little more pushback than we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, you can't leave the show anymore. So, I mean, to be clear, you were never leaving, but I don't know. I love April Fools. It's one of my favorite days, but apparently some people didn't pick up on it. We got several emails. Our producer, Nate, got emails.
Yeah, I'm here, obviously. Yeah. April Fools.
Some folks might be sad that it's not true, but I think mostly people are sad that they thought it was true.
Yeah, I appreciate the sadness. If you were happy that I was leaving, then just don't ever let me know that, please. I can't take it.
Some folks said, why can't it be John? And I was like, well, how can I make your feed not get this anymore?
Yikes.
Kidding.
No, everybody loves you, John. And yeah, we got another good one coming today. This is a well-known case in the media, but I don't think the details are very well known.
I had never heard of it, but it's kind of a well-known fact that I live under a rock. But before we get into it, I do want to say a quick thank you to Melissa, who joined us over on Patreon this week. Melissa and every other Patreon member just got a brand new episode last week, and it was about Brady violations. Now, a Brady violation, we went into what it is, what it isn't, and we gave some very specific cases that kind of illustrated how important it is. So if you are interested in that content, it is only available when you join a $3 membership or higher, and that you can do that at patreon.com/truecrimecast.
We also went into where it came from. I think we often have references and like Amber Alerts. We did an episode on where that came from last year. So trying to be an educational show, you know?
It was really cool. I mean, it felt like you were on the phone with the prosecutors podcast because they are actually attorneys, but I think we nailed it.
Yeah, I agree. But you have to be on Patreon to find out.
Yep.
And not for today's episode. This is for anybody and everybody.
I want to say it. Why don't you get the ball rolling?
I thought you'd want to say that because you wanted to avoid saying Adriano de Souza.
Is that
right?
That's not a false statement. But your name is written above it, and I'm thankful.
On the morning of February 3rd, 2003, a limousine driver named Adriano de Souza.
If I was doing that line, you would just think a limousine driver who has not been named.
An unnamed limousine driver was sitting outside of a castle. Now, I don't mean that metaphorically, like it's a big house. I
mean, we have a pawn shop up the road called The Castle, so I get it.
This is an actual castle, a 35-room mansion in Alhambra, California, known as the Pyrenees Castle. It even has turrets on top of the stone facade, and it has a castle gate.
If I ever win the lottery, this is one of the signs.
That you will have a castle?
Yeah. But I'll be here where I am now, so you'll just look over and you'll see a castle crew and a moat.
This limo driver had shown up to pick somebody up, and he had been waiting for about an hour, and then he heard a gunshot. And shortly after the gunshot, his employer, who he was there to pick up, walked out of the house and was holding a gun. And according to De Souza's testimony, he said, "I think he killed somebody." Inside the castle, in the foyer, you should probably call it a foyer.
Yeah,
in a castle.
In a castle, it's definitely that.
A 40-year-old actress named Lana Clarkson was slumped in a chair. She had been shot once through the mouth. Her leopard print purse was still slung over her shoulder, and she had only been dead for a few minutes. She had met the man who owned the castle fewer than 3 hours before losing her life.
It was a brutal scene. I remember reading the forensics of the scene, and There was blood under her. She had been shot in the mouth, so there were pieces of her teeth scattered there in the blood. I've never seen anything like that, and I don't want to.
No,
it
it's
sounded awful.
Horrific.
So the man who owned the castle was named Phil Spector. And to understand this case and to understand how Lana Clarkson ended up dead in that foyer, you really have to understand who Phil Spector was. Not who he had been in his prime, though that matters too, but who he had become by 2003. Because this story has, multiple victims. Lana Clarkson was killed, and the truth about Phil Spector, which, his money and fame and lawyers spent years trying to bury, you're going to hear about that as well.
Yeah, let's spend some time talking about Lana Clarkson. She was born on April 5th, 1962 in Long Beach, California. She grew up in Sonoma County, attended Gloverdale High School and Pacific Union College Preparatory School in Northern California. But she would eventually move back to the Los Angeles area with her family during her teenage years. By the early 1980s, she was pursuing a career in acting and modeling. Exactly the kind of ambition that brought hundreds of women to Hollywood every year and still brings lots of people to LA from around the world. For a while, it worked. In 1983, she landed a role in Roger Corman's film Deathstalker, which is kind of a B-level movie, a sword and sorcery. It's one of those that's kind of a cult classic and not really mainstream. And Corman was so impressed with her that he made her the lead in his next movie, Barbarian Queen, in 1985. He described this character as the original Xena. Who's Xena, John?
The Xena warrior princess. She was kind of I think of Wonder Woman, but like an Amazon woman. That's who I picture in my
Wonder
head.
Woman is Amazonian. I don't want to get too deep into that.
But like her costume looks more forest.
I get it. And she continued to play that type of role. She appeared in John Landis's comedy, Amazon Women on the Moon in 1987. She had small roles in big films like Scarface and Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
Those are the only two movies so far that I've ever heard of.
She guest starred on TV shows like Three's Company, Knight Rider, Night Court, and The Jeffersons.
I've heard of all those.
All those big in my childhood. She appeared in commercials for Mercedes-Benz, Kmart, Nike, and Anheuser-Busch.
Oh man, I miss Kmart.
So she, due to the kinds of roles that she had somewhat of a cult following. She signed autographs at comic book conventions, which, believe it or not, were happening back then. But by the mid-90s, the roles weren't coming as fast as they had been in the past. Hollywood's not a kind place, especially to women when they reach a certain age, and Lana Clarkson was going through that in full capacity.
By 2001, she was living in Venice, California. She was writing and developing her own material. She created, wrote, produced, and directed a showcase reel called Lana Unleashed, her attempt to relaunch her career on her own terms. In early January 2003, she took a part-time job as a hostess at the House of Blues in West Hollywood. This was a practical decision. She needed the income while she kept developing her projects. So, I don't know, do people look at that and see, oh, you're a has-been? I don't know.
I don't know. I think it's kind of ebbed and flowed through the years of whether people admire the hustle or whether people think you're trying too hard. It's showbiz is a tough business.
I think the rule in people's minds, at least, is if you see someone on TV, that automatically means they're famous, therefore they are rich.
Their life is great.
But I mean, Jamie, you've been on TV for this show.
Have.
You've been on crime TV. So unless you got some money under the table that I don't know about, it's not always true.
I am not rich or famous. But I ended up on Court TV, but not on the bad side of Court TV,
That's a plus.
I was not accused of anything.
She was 40 years old. She was still working on the dream. Her friends described her as warm, fun, optimistic. Her close friend, Diana Bennett, later told reporters that Lana had big dreams. She wasn't depressed, crazy, or any of those things. On the last day of her life, she went shopping and bought a new pair of shoes. That detail would later definitely serve to, be a point that mattered at her trial. That evening, she went to work at the House of Blues, and a man came in who would change everything. And so now, let's spin things around and talk about Phil Spector.
Harvey Philip Spector was born on December 26th of 1939 in the Bronx, New York. His dad, Ben Spector, died by suicide in 1949 when Phil was just 9 years old. On his dad's gravestone were the words, "To know him was to love him." And years later, Phil Spector wrote a song with that title for a group that he had co-founded at 18 called the Teddy Bears. And it actually became a #1 hit in 1958. At that time, he was still a teenager, but he had a bright future in front of him. Obviously, to have a #1 hit before he turned 20 is huge.
So through the 1960s, Phil Spector became one of the most powerful and innovative figures in the history of American popular music. He founded Phil's Records in 1961. That was when he became the youngest record label owner ever in the United States. He developed what was later to become known as the Wall of Sound. This is a production technique that layered dozens of musicians, multiple guitars, basses, keyboards, strings, everything you could think of in echo chambers into a dense, overwhelming, beautiful noise. So basically, he was a pioneer in sound engineer. Is that a safe way to
think that's
describe him?
That's very accurate. You explained what it was. I need an example, so maybe I'll go look that up later.
He produced the Ronettes' Be My Baby, the Crystals' Da Do Ron Ron. I want to play just a second of that right now. Hopefully we don't get sued. I feel like people would recognize that even if they don't know the name. He also produced the Righteous Brothers, You've Lost That Loving Feeling, which some have called the greatest pop record ever made.
Dude.
Some. Not necessarily me, but this wasn't in my time.
I think that's because you've lost that loving feeling.
Maybe. He produced John Lennon's Instant Karma and the Beatles' Let It Be album. That is incredible. This is something that I am very familiar with.
So, we should have started and ended with, he produced the Beatles.
Yeah.
Albums, he didn't create the Beatles.
Yeah. So Paul McCartney famously hated what Spector did to The Long and Winding Road, but nevertheless, he was a very big part of the Beatles' success. He won a Grammy Award for producing the concert for a Bangladesh album. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. Tom Wolfe called him the first tycoon of teen. By his mid-20s, he was a self-made millionaire. He was a musical genius. He was also something else entirely.
The private Phil Spector was a very different kind of person from the music mogul that he was during the daytime. He married Ronnie Bennett, who was the lead singer of the Ronettes, the woman he had produced, the woman whose voice was the instrument of some of his greatest records in 1968. According to Ronnie's memoir, their marriage was a nightmare. She said that Spector kept her essentially imprisoned in their mansion. There were times when they were arguing and he actually hid her shoes so that she could not walk out on him. On the rare occasions that she was allowed to go outside by herself, he made her drive with a life-size inflatable doll that looked like him in the passenger seat so people wouldn't think she was alone.
Wow.
Next level, wild. He kept a glass coffin in the basement, and there were times when he threatened to put her in it if she tried to leave him.
So this is what we call a power and control dynamic in domestic violence. He is the boss, and she must submit to his authority.
And yeah, it's threatening to put her in a glass coffin. That's a first for True Crime Cast. She was finally able to get out of the house without her shoes in 1972. The divorce was finalized in 1974, so she spent 6 years in what had to be a very toxic marriage. Throughout the 80s and 90s, Spector became increasingly reclusive, retreating into his Pyrenees Castle. He surrounded himself with bodyguards, and he developed what multiple people knew him described as a terrifying pattern of behavior around the combination of alcohol and firearms. He had at least 2 prior firearms-related convictions before the night in question here that Lana Clarkson died. When we get back from the break, we'll dive into some of those charges and what actually happened that night in Phil Spector's castle.
One of the most powerful aspects of Spector's murder trials was the testimony from 5 women who described in detail what Phil Spector did to them when he had been drinking and did not want them to leave. Their accounts were very consistent to one another, and they spanned for more than a decade. So first is Diane Ogden. This was a talent coordinator in the entertainment industry who worked as Spector's assistant in 1988. In March of 1989, she attended a party at his home, his Pasadena home, and when the party had ended, she tried to leave, but Spector disappeared and then reappeared screaming. He had put a gun to her face and neck and told her that he would blow her brains out. He forced her toward his bedroom and attempted to sexually assault her. She would go on to testify that he wasn't my Phil. He wasn't the man that I loved. He was something demonic, like another ego, like another person completely, is how basically she's describing this guy. She later returned to his home once, and when she tried to leave again, he reappeared with an Uzi submachine gun, screaming that she wasn't going anywhere. She ran to her car, and he banged the gun against her window, and she drove away as fast as she could.
Yikes.
That is insane.
It is, and it didn't stop there. The next person who testified was Dorothy Melvin. She was a personal manager, and at the time, she managed comedians, specifically Joan Rivers, who everybody loves Joan Rivers. And Rivers had actually dated Spector on and off in the early 90s. Dorothy would describe Phil when he was sober as brilliant beyond belief and a wonderful person to be around. Conversely, she said, when he's drinking and he gets to a certain point, he totally loses it and becomes a demon. 2 women in a row bringing up the fact that he acts like he's possessed by an evil entity. In July 1993, she visited him at his Pasadena home, and he had been drinking vodka pretty heavily before she got there. She fell asleep on his couch, and when she woke up, Spector was outside pointing a .38 snub-nosed revolver at her car. She tried to leave, and he hit her with the gun. He pistol whipped her, which the police report from that night didn't note that, but she claimed that this did happen at trial and that he ordered her at gunpoint to take her clothes off. The jury was able to hear voicemails that Spector had left for Melvin afterward. In one, he signed off by saying, "Love, and come have lunch with me someday. Philip, a.k.a. the Prince of Darkness."
I mean, that is another name for Satan.
That is so ominous and scary.
Third was Melissa Grosvenor. She was a waitress from New York who had met Spector in 1991 and dated him for about a year and a half. She described him as very charming and quick-witted. Then one night at his Beverly Hills home, she told him around 2 a.m. that she was tired and wanted to leave. She testified, "He turned to look at me and said, 'What? You want to go?' And right then, his whole demeanor changed. He left the room and returned wearing a shoulder holster." This is a leather holster for a weapon. He walked up to her, held the gun between her eyes, and said, "If you try to leave, I'm going to kill you."
I mean, this is already a pattern, right? And it didn't stop there. Next up, Stephanie Jennings. a music industry photographer who had dated Spector kind of long distance in the mid-90s. In January of 95, she joined him in New York for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inductions. They stayed in the same floor at the Carlisle Hotel, and after a party where he got extremely drunk, she went back to her room. A bodyguard knocked and said that Spector wanted to see her in his room. She refused to go. A few minutes later, Spector showed up at her door. He was drunk. He slapped her, he pushed her, and caused her to fall down, then pulled a gun on her, putting a chair in front of the door and told her that she wasn't going anywhere. She called 911, and at trial, the jury was able to hear this recording of him screaming, threatening, and essentially kidnapping Stephanie.
There's a fifth woman named Diana Holder. She had known Spector socially. Her account echoed the others, an evening that started warmly, and then there was alcohol, and after that, a shift in his demeanor, and then a gun, and an attempted rape. So this is very much the established pattern. She later testified, "I cared about him. He didn't have to do that. He could have been romantic, but he did it by gunpoint." That's the thing, is this guy is a very well-to-do guy. By all accounts, before he's drunk, he is a very pleasant, great guy. But then the alcohol comes out, and it seems like he could have had any of these women consensually, but then this side of him came out.
Right.
In closing arguments of a retrial, prosecutor Truck Dew told the jury, quote, "Phil Spector is a very dangerous man who has a history of playing Russian roulette with women. 6 women. Lana just happened to be the 6th. Not one of these 5 women had come forward on their own. All had been subpoenaed. Most described still having complicated feelings about Spector even after what he had allegedly done to them. That detail, perhaps more than any other, illustrates that there's a particular power a man like Phil Spector had over people in his orbit." I mean, I think maybe it's just the dichotomy that they did see him as this awesome guy, but then there was this very evil persona that came out as well.
And the mixed emotions is certainly something you see from abuse victims of. A lot of people will say, why didn't they leave? Why didn't they get out? It's the power dynamic just psychologically tortures you so much. And it sounds like he was doing just that. Let's go on to the evening in question. February 3rd, 2003. The day before, it had stretched into the early morning hours. Phil Spector had come to the House of Blues in West Hollywood. He was 63 years old at the time. He saw Lana Clarkson was working at the door as a hostess. She didn't know who he was. When she initially turned him away from the club, thinking, according to lead homicide detective Rich Tomlin, that the name Spector was a woman's name. I mean, it's a last name, so that's not necessarily a part of it anyway, but he was very unhappy that she turned him away from the club. He never got turned away from anything in LA. A security guard pulled her aside and said, "Look, this is Phil Spector. He's kind of a big deal, and we need to treat him like it." So she apologized and let him into the club. Over the course of the evening, Phil had worked himself up to where he was completely fixated on Clarkson. He sent her a drink. He stopped by and talked to her and was his normal, charming self, like he was when he was sober. As the club was closing, he invited her back to his house for a drink. She was hesitant, and witnesses would say that she eventually agreed, but it was kind of reluctantly at his insistence. She got in his limo, and that's where the driver we mentioned earlier, Adriano de Souza, drove them to the Pyrenees Castle in Alhambra. It was 2 a.m. when they got there.
When they got there, Spector and Clarkson went inside, and de Souza waited outside in the car, in the limousine. And the prosecutor's theory presented at both trials was that at some point inside the castle, Lana Clarkson tried to leave. And we know that in the past, this has been the thing that sets him off. So they went on to say that Spector, as he had done with other women before, did not let her go. And he produced a Colt Cobra 38 caliber revolver. Prosecutors argued that he forced the gun into her mouth and pulled the trigger. At approximately 5 a.m., about 2 hours and 55 minutes after they arrived, D'Souza heard a single gunshot. So the police were called, and but before that, the back door opened. Spector came out holding a gun, and according to D'Souza's testimony, his exact words were, "I think I killed somebody." And that's what he said that Phil had said when he came out the back door.
Right.
So then 911 was called. So when police arrived and spoke to Spector, he gave a different account. He said, "I don't know where she got the gun from." He told the officer, but then she started waving it around, and he later told the Esquire magazine that Lana Clarkson's death was an accidental suicide, that she, in his words, quote, "kissed the gun," end quote.
Yeah, if there's anything hard to believe, it's pretty much anything he says after he's been drinking. And I will say most of the time when a gunshot wound is in the mouth, it is self-inflicted, but that's not always the case. And the physical evidence back that up. And by that, I mean the fact that it wasn't a suicide. Clarkson was found slumped in a chair in the foyer. Her leopard print purse was still over her shoulder, and the bullet had entered at a downward angle, which is very unlikely to happen if somebody shoots themselves. And that was backed up by lead detective Rich Tomlin, who said, if you committed suicide, you're going to point the gun downward. It would be level or maybe even upward. Fragments of her teeth were scattered across the crime scene, consistent with the explosive force of a shot fired, not from completely inside her mouth, but very close range into her mouth. There was blood and tissue from Clarkson found on the back of Spector's white jacket, and the coroner very quickly ruled this death a homicide. Phil Spector, having come out of the house right after it happened, was arrested that same morning. He was formally charged with second-degree murder on November 20th, 2003. And during this time, he was out on bail. There was $1 million bail, and he could pay that no problem. So he was able to be a free man while awaiting trial.
So we mentioned a retrial. The first trial began on March 19th, 2007. That was more than 4 years after Lana Clarkson's death. Judge Larry Paul Feidler presided, and the proceedings were televised, so you could actually watch this. Spector arrived to court each day in increasingly elaborate wigs, a detail that became kind of a grim running commentary like that you would people would talk about after or during the proceedings. It's kind of weird. His lead defense attorney was Bruce Coulter, the New York lawyer best known for representing John Gotti, who, I don't know, if I'm being represented by the lawyer that represented John Gotti, I think most people would presume that I am in fact guilty. Is that fair to say?
Possibly. And I don't know, we covered John Gotti. He got out of a lot of stuff until he didn't.
Coulter argued that Lana Clarkson had killed herself and that she was despondent over her stalling career, and that they had picked up Spector's gun and fired it into her own mouth. The defense hired some of the most prominent forensic experts in the country, one of those being Dr. Henry Lee, who had testified in both the O.J. Simpson and Michael Peterson cases. He appeared for the defense, but was accused of concealing crime scene evidence. A small piece of an acrylic fingernail found at the scene and potentially significant to the physical evidence disappeared after Lee handled it. Lee denied concealing anything. The jury never heard his full testimony on the matter. This is that's big. Wonder what happened and why it went missing.
Right. And that's tricky for the jury because I don't know. I realize that most of the conversations about things like that are held outside of the jury's presence, but I think they know when something's weird with a witness. They're being asked to constantly leave and come back and being read decisions that are kind of veiled. I don't know.
When you hear that a piece of evidence that was a piece of her fingernail was missing, I mean, what does your brain go to? Like, why would there be a fragment of her fingernail there?
Yeah, that's a
I mean,
good
I think
question.
the only thing you can do is speculate at this point, but in my mind, was she trying to get the gun out of her mouth or at least cover her mouth? And when the gun went off, it hit her fingernail before it entered into her head?
Yeah, I
Or
mean,
was this just a defensive wound of some kind where the fingernail came off?
right. Maybe they could test and see if she broke it off while trying to defend herself. Maybe it has Spector's skin cells under it or something. Yeah, it's all speculation because we don't have it. The prosecution presented the 5 women we mentioned earlier with all the gun incidents, with Spector's consistent pattern of abuse and threatening and almost always involving alcohol and a firearm. They presented De Souza's testimony and the recordings of Spector's words that night at the scene. The forensic evidence they had was also powerful. They had blood spatter evidence, the bullet trajectory, and the position of the body, all which pointed to homicide. They presented the detail that on the day she died, Clarkson had gone shopping and bought new shoes, which is they used to say that if she was planning her own death, maybe she wouldn't have done that. The prosecutor asked the jury directly, does a woman who's planning to take her life go out and buy new shoes that day? John, people, I don't know, mental health's a weird thing. I'm not sure that would move the needle for me in any way, but the prosecutor, who's Alan Jackson, made a big deal out of it and seemed to have an impact. Cutler withdrew from the case in August 2007, citing a difference of strategy with his client. The jury deliberated for 12 long days. Came back on September 26th of 2007 where the jury was deadlocked. They had 10 votes for conviction, but 2 holdouts. Judge Feitler declared a mistrial. So for the Clarkson family, it's a devastating setback because they're going to have to live through all this again.
So the retrial began on October 20th, 2008, and this time it was not televised. Spector's new lead defense attorney was Doran Weinberg. The same core evidence was presented, but this time the judge also allowed jurors to consider the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. Prosecutor Truck Dew took the case for the retrial and was widely regarded as more effective than the prosecution team in his first trial. So the 5 women testified again. De Souza testified again. This time the jury deliberated for 30 hours, over 19 days. That is a long time. That's not
really
just the trial.
long
That
time.
is all deliberation, 19 days. On April 13th, 2009, they returned with a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Phil Spector was immediately taken into custody. Later, on May 29th, 2009, the judge sentenced him to 19 years to life. That was the maximum sentence available. So with the additional 4 years for personal use of a firearm, that means that he would have been 88 years old before he was eligible for parole. He was 69 at the time of sentencing. His wife, Rochelle, told reporters outside the courtroom, quote, "I'm going to stand by him and get him out of this awful place so he can get home where he belongs." End quote. Spector had nothing to say.
Obviously, there were going to be appeals here. In 2011, an appeals court in California affirmed the original conviction, and the California Supreme Court declined to review it. Every subsequent appeal has been rejected. In 2012, Lana Clarkson's mother, Donna, settled a civil wrongful death suit against Spector and his insurance company for an undisclosed amount. At Spector's sentencing, Donna Clarkson had read a statement on behalf of her family. In that statement, she said, "All of our plans together are destroyed. Now I can only visit her at the cemetery." Phil Spector spent the rest of his life in prison. His health deteriorated pretty quickly. In 2014, he was transferred to the California Health Care Facility, a prison medical center in Stockton. On January 16, 2021, Spector died of complications from COVID-19 when he was 81 years old. Right up until the end, though, he maintained that he did not shoot Clarkson in his castle that night.
Yeah, it's wild. So coverage of his death prompted a lot of backlash. The New York Times originally wrote that his legacy was marred by a murder conviction, and Rolling Stones originally wrote that his life was upended after being sentenced. Both publications faced a lot of criticism from Clarkson's family, from journalists as well, and then from readers, for kind of framing a murder as something that had happened to Phil Spector instead of something that had been committed by Phil Spector.
Right.
Both of those publications revised their stories. So that was a small moment, but I think it did matter, because for years, the dominant culture and the narrative from the culture around the case had centered around Phil Spector, the guy that he was, and the, like, kind of him in his prime, and not all this other stuff that we knew about. Lana Clarkson had been reduced to, a footnote in the music legend's story, but she is not a footnote. And she was a 40-year-old woman who went to work on a Sunday night and never came home.
In a statement after the trial, Donna said, Lana Clarkson was a warm, compassionate, kind, loving woman who would be 58 years old now. Her energy, brightness, and love of life has sustained her family since her murder in 2003. I'm going to be honest with you, John. When I started researching this case, my research centered on Phil Spector. It was his name in the news at the time. That was where my recollection came from. And I hope that when we translate this story, it becomes one about a victim and a monster, not about two victims.
Yeah. I hope that's how we presented it, because, it doesn't really matter what you do that is good. If you take someone's life, that's going to be your legacy, in my opinion. I mean, maybe some people can think of it differently, but I don't know. I don't want to be defined by my mistakes, but I feel like the legacy of True Crime Cast, if there is one, would be forever tainted if one of us murdered someone. At least I would hope it would.
You're right, John. She was taken way too soon, and the more I got into the case, the more I just realized that it's all too often that we focus, especially when there is celebrity involved, on the biggest name in the story, the most well-known name. I mean, there was a time when she was a hit in Hollywood. She had a big following, but anytime somebody talks about this story, it's all about Spector, and I hate that. And this is a big reminder for me. So not only for this case, but moving forward, I think it's important for us to put the focus where it belongs, on the families and the victims, and hoping they got justice.
Yep. Guys, we appreciate you sticking around on this case, and hopefully you learned something new today. There was a lot about Phil Spector that I did not know. I knew some of his songs. I didn't know who he was necessarily, but his music and some of the entertainment things that he did was recognizable. But that's the thing. A lot of his stuff was recognizable. He was, but this dark secret that he kept, a lot of people didn't know about.
Absolutely. We really appreciate you guys listening to these. Getting really close to CrimeCon. They finally put our announcement out there. Again, if you're interested in going to Vegas, Vegas is cheap to get to. Cheap flights, cheap hotel. They just assume you're going to gamble it all away. You can get 10% off your CrimeCon ticket with code TCC10. So make sure you use that. We will be on Podcast Row there at the Exhibition Center. So make sure you come find me.
Yep.
And I say me because John's not coming.
Yeah. I'm not leaving the show. I just also have a convention that weekend scheduled a year in advance. So it's unfortunate timing, but Jamie will be there. Nate will be there. It's still going to be a good time.
Absolutely, guys. We really appreciate you. And if you don't mind, leave us a review. It's a great way to recommend cases, and we'll read it live on the air when we get it in.
Even if it's not a review, if it's a comment of any kind, we'll read anything at this point, as long as there's a 5-star beside it.
Right. Yeah. Well, we will read anything you put on the teleprompter.
Yep. Guys, we love you. And until next crime, this has been True Crime Cast.
You've listened to True Crimecast, distributed by Stoveleg Media. Check out stoveleg.com to find out more about your hosts and to find other podcasts to listen to. Stoveleg Media, igniting conversation.